I have a feeling that we should get started, don't you think, people? And who would like to give a
Verin
report?
then invited reports from participants, starting with John Dearden. There's very little to report on my side, but we're working on funding channels and opportunities to support our projects. Bonging Kosi from Pietermaritzburg shared inspiring progress from the Reverend Walter Tabash Methodist Development Center. Despite the challenges of small-scale farming, their garden provides year-round vegetables for staff and volunteers. Surplus is sold affordably or donated to charities, like old age homes and community outreaches. They're currently growing spinach, beetroot, and potatoes, praying for more rain after a dry spell. Manana Matama from Sedibeng district reported planting 200 trees, fruit, evergreen, shade, and specboom, in collaboration with libraries, schools, and communities. They've engaged social development officials for funding and are applying for dedicated land. Community education on trees' role in soil health was a key focus, amplified by local radio and newspaper coverage. John Dearden reminded everyone to quantify their impact, echoing Nancy's words from past meetings, such as the value of those trees and volunteer efforts for stronger funding proposals. Dr. Willem Landman joined the meeting and introductions followed.
Thank you. Willem, I have made you host. Hold
Okay.
on. Just hold on a minute. Let me just have a look whether that worked. Yes, it should have.
Okay. So what you should see now is a graph with a lot of red on it. The top of the graph, it says El Nino, and at the bottom it says La Nina.
Yes.
Can you see that? Okay. So that actually is the forecast that was completed maybe 15 minutes ago. That shows the expectation on whether there will be an El Nino or La Nina event. When we have La Nina events, we most often have very wet seasons. And when we have La Nina events, we often have dry seasons, and that's specifically so for the summer period, over the summer rainfall regions. So the El Nino and La Nina link over the southwestern Cape and even the southern coastal areas is not particularly strong. So it's mostly over the Highveld, I suppose, where this link is very strong. And so it's interesting to predict El Nino, not only because this is our job, but we can actually predict El Nino events long time before it actually happens. Normally, at least 6 months before an event happens, we can predict whether it will be an El Nino or La Nina. And here's the latest forecast that I've just issued, like I said a few minutes ago, and it shows the sea surface temperature deviation or anomalies from this central Pacific Ocean area where we see El Nino and La Nina events to be the best defined. And what it shows, and this is what we've been having now for a few months, is that we are in a weak La Nina phase, and that phase may continue for at least into midsummer. But after that, we see that the La Nina phase might even change into an El Nino event. But that's really far ahead of time now. At least we see that there's a chance that maybe next summer, the 26-7 season, not the 25-26 season, will be an El Nino season. But for this season, we are still in La Nina, and the forecast is that this event, albeit very weak, will continue for the larger part of our summer. Now, what does that mean for rainfall? Because we actually want to see the forecast for rainfall more than we want to see the forecast for El Nino, because the forecasts are also done by these very sophisticated climate models that to some extent listen to El Nino and La Nina events, but those models also listen to what happens over areas surrounding Southern Africa, for example, the Atlantic Ocean and the Indian Ocean. So in addition to the El Nino forecast, we need to see what the forecasts from these climate models look like. And just to make a distinction here, it's not the climate models that are used specifically for climate change projections over the decades ahead, this particular model configuration is actually just for the next couple of months. And so I'm going to show you my forecasts that I issued, as actually compiled yesterday. And I'm just going to show, I think, the December, January, February season, because that is really the midsummer period. And on the left, you see a map of the larger part of Africa. It's actually the whole of Africa south of 20 degrees north. And one of the reasons why our area is going so far north is because one of our clients that does business in Africa, and they'd like to know more about what is expected over areas north of the equator. But of course, we are more interested in knowing what might happen over our area. So you see three colors on that map. White, and white means actually no forecast. That means the forecast system that we have does not really give us any indication whether or not this might be a wet season or a dry season. Where you see blue, the blue areas are showing enhanced likelihood or enhanced probabilities of it being a wet season. And where you see orange or red, like those are areas where there's enhanced probabilities of below normal rainfall. So the forecast map on the left is showing that over this Gauteng and the larger part of the summer rainfall region going into um, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, showing a good rainfall season ahead. We actually had a very nice storm last night. My friend who lives in Centurion, but about 20 kilometers from where I live, at 53 millimeters. I only had 23 millimeters. But we had quite a good rainstorm last night. But the expectation is for once we get into midsummer, that we may see a continuation of events like we've experienced yesterday, to have quite a few days of rain. Now, can we believe the forecasts? And this is what those two maps on the right are supposed to show. And so I will just refer to the map on the top right, which is as a skill map, verified over like a 23-year period of forecasts that we would have made if we knew that had the technology now if we had made these forecasts 23 years ago using the technology we have now. And what this map shows is if there's orange or dark orange areas, we have seen in the past that this forecast system, this model that we use, have actually been very successful in predicting wet seasons, the above normal category, the wet season. So that means that the forecast that we see here, we can actually believe it because it has actually been proven now that in the past, when we predicted wet, it had actually happened. So this is a forecast. It consists of two parts. Number one, it shows weak La Nina that may last for the larger part of the summer period. And then there's a possibility that it might change into an El Nino season for the next summer, not this one, the next summer. And how this is then seen in the forecasts of rainfall over the larger part of South Africa, it looks like we might be headed towards a very nice wet season once again. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Now, any questions or comments to Willem?
Willem, thank you for that. It was very, very interesting. It's fascinating. It's actually good also that you gave feedback saying that you were accurate, because a lot of the forecasts, sometimes you never really know what the previous forecast was. They're always forecast for the future. So mentioning they're accurate is really, I think, valuable and nice to hear. I'm sure Jack would be far better positioned to ask the questions, but these types of forecasts, what impact does that have on on commercial agriculture? Obviously, a lot of the people here aren't really involved in that side of things, but it can affect supply and demand and prices. What will these forecasts do, and what impact will they have? How will the farmers use this information, especially for next year, in their planning?
Okay, this is interesting question because Emma and I have been involved in the research paper that we submitted, and we're still waiting for the reviewers to send their comments back. What we have done is we took not the rainfall at this particular farm. This farm was in Babsfontein, just east of Tshwane, and we looked at the possibility of forecasting the dryland crop yield at this farmer. This farm was at this farm. And we have found that if the forecasts are skillful, there's huge profits to be made. But the skill is there's a condition to the forecasts. If we predict there's a high yield season possible, and if we predict there's a low yield season possible, the forecasts can actually make the farmer a lot of money. But when we start to issue forecasts like, and this is often what happens when the person doesn't know what might happen, he says, "Oh, don't worry, farmers, it looks like a normal season." These normal type forecasts actually can be quite detrimental. We first have found that the kind of skill maps that you see on the right that we have calculated for this middle, this normal category, it shows there's no skill. Moreover, in this paper that I've just referred to, that Emma is also a co-authoring, it shows that if farmers use this forecast of normal, it can actually lead to bankruptcy. So there are certain conditions that need to be adhered to. One of the things is that we need to go and assess for a particular farmer, is this farmer going to benefit from the use of forecasts? Some farmers don't. And this is one of the interesting things that is part of is an essential part of making seasonal forecasts available. Is that maybe it's not for everybody. And the farmer who may be interested in the forecast might have to come and talk with us and see if there's benefit. There's a farmer lady in northern Namibia, Sylvia van Biljon, and she has given me 60 years of rainfall recorded at her farm near Grootfontein. And so what I did was I took her data, her rainfall data, and I developed a forecast model for her farm. And what this has actually shown is that over that northern part of Namibia, there is massive advantage to be gained from looking at the forecasts, from the forecast that we issue. Notwithstanding the evidence that we've provided to this farmer lady, she still uses indigenous knowledge. For example, there's supposed to be some tree or a shrub or something that flowers when there's going to be a good season. And so I asked her, now, can you tell me how this particular bush has flowered in the past so that we can do a type of verification like I have done on the map on the right? And she said, no, I just believe what my father and my grandfather have taught me. If this thing blossoms, then we should get rain. If it doesn't, the rain's going to be absent or late. And a couple of years ago, my forecasts were not particularly helpful. I have to admit that. But for the most part, they work really well. But that particular year, the forecast for this farm over northern Namibia was a bit dodgy. And she said to me, don't worry, even the tree lied to me this year. So sometimes there are seasons when forecasts simply won't pan out. And this is one of the problems with seasonal forecasts, is that it's nowhere nearly as skillful as a weather forecast. You know, people often think that if the weather forecasts are good, then that leads to us also getting excellent seasonal forecasts. It's really a lot more complicated than that, and maybe that's a discussion for another day.
Yeah, thanks very much for that. Just as a way of a follow-up, it sounded very similar to stock trading. So you have the people only make money on the highs and lows of something. If it's
Yeah.
stagnant, that nobody makes any money. And the same then with the farmers. If you've got the highs and lows and you can predict and plan for those, then you can make some money. And then just a thought is, how many farmers are really using these predictions? By the sounds of it, it's still fairly new. And so those the uptakers of this, and even your lady in Namibia, that they could be good case studies then for for showing it for a majority of the
Yeah,
uptake. And the
absolutely.
early,
So, sorry?
but the early movers on this then will be able to capitalize on the on the the extra the money and the yields that they will get from the farms. But as more people take it up, those opportunities will diminish because you'll be stuck then with a supply and demand where you'll be oversupplied because everybody's used the predictions and have planted accordingly. But then other opportunities will come up. But do you see that as a way of it having a larger benefit to the community?
Unfortunately, John, there's often a disconnect between people like myself who focus almost their entire careers on making forecasts and making forecasts better. People like Emma, who's been talking with farmers a lot, she would be in a much better position to answer the questions regarding forecast uptake. One of the ways that we have found forecast uptake to be improved is if we, like, for example, with this farmer lady in Namibia, when we start to use the data from her farm, from his farm. In fact, this lady said to me, the forecast that I've issued to her over the past few years is the best she has ever seen. Obviously, it's not true. We don't do a particularly better job than other people would do. It's just because she knows her rainfall data go into my model, and then I would think that she have more faith in the forecast because of the fact that she, to some extent, contributes to the forecast. But in terms of forecast uptake as in a general sense, I think people like Emma would be in a much better position to answer that question.
Well, I mean, John, it's mixed. I'm actually doing some work at the moment, not on seasonal forecasting, but on short-term hazard forecasting for sand and dust storms. And it's really interesting because even a highly technical forecast for a city that's vulnerable to sand and dust storms. So, they get, like in Dubai, for example, they get a short-term warning for a sand and dust storm. And those are pretty good. They're short-term. They use a range of different data sources. So, it'll say there's a sand or dust storm coming. Lots of people don't heed them for all sorts of reasons. It's really interesting. And we're still kind of figuring this out. Some of them are because there's not the enabling environment in place to be able to do some of the activities that they'd like to. Some of them because there's some communication issues around language in which the short-term forecast is made. So it's really interesting. It's really mixed. There's a range of different issues and reasons why people don't necessarily take up a forecast, including trust issues.
Thank you.
Other reports included UODA's engagement with government departments for agricultural support and workshops on farming God's way. Danisa's turmeric and rabbit projects, emphasizing organic practices, and Scott's reflections on an entrepreneurship conference, calling for better connections between educators, investors, and grassroots agriculture. Bishop Vereen wrapped up, noting the blend of science, faith, and action. Thank you for listening. Together, we're making a difference.